Today's guest is another entrepreneur at heart who left the corporate world in 2016 to bet on himself. He has 20 plus years in the healthcare industry, and it came to a point where he said, it's time to start a new chapter. He is the founder and president of Death of the Fox Brewing Company, New Jersey's first and only brewery and coffee house roastery. Let me introduce him. Chuck Garrity, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Nick, how you doing?
Good. I was looking forward to this.
Yeah, so was I.
I'm glad you can be on, and oddly enough, it's Cinco de Mayo, so I'm sure you're going to be busy here.
I'm drinking coffee right now, but pretend it's a beer.
Good stuff. I met Chuck when my wife and I opened Rough House Indoor Dog Park, which I became a frequent and curious customer to taste what Chuck was going to make next. And you always have something interesting to taste. That's for sure.
Thanks.
So you started in the healthcare industry with 20 plus years experience. Your education is at the College of New Jersey in Ryder with a BA in political science. And then you got your MBA at Widener University in Health and Medical Services Administration. So you were basically a consultant, correct? In the
I was a management consultant for probably about 15 years.
Okay.
And then otherwise, I worked in management positions in health organizations like Drexel, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So I worked, for those organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically, once I got into the consulting world, I took that experience and applied that across dozens of health organizations all over the country.
Got it. And I see some of the companies that you worked for: Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Beacon's Partners, Drexel University College of Medicine, Arcadia Solutions, Price Waterhouse Coopers. So you've been around in the medical field, that's for sure.
Yeah. It was definitely it spent a lot of time on the plane.
Yeah.
I was VP or manager of a large region at one point for Arcadia, Eastern States. So half of the country. When I was at KPMG Beacon, so I went through. It's interesting. I went through a bit of mergers and acquisitions. So the company I was with, Beacon Partners, I spent probably the majority of my career there, 12 years. And we got bought up by KPMG. So you just kind of going through that whole trajectory of working for a small company, and then to the point where you are, that company it's private, purchased by a larger company, and just that whole experience was really interesting. And then Arcadia was more of a startup, I would guess, say venture capital situation, and that too was really interesting working for, especially in a business development sales capacity for a very aggressive venture-backed company.
Got it. And then it appears you became an independent contractor then in the healthcare. And at that point in time, was that when you were thinking on making a move?
Yeah, well, actually, so I was thinking about that probably, from the point where I would say that 2011, 2012, really when the brewery laws changed in New Jersey around 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Christie passed a law that was supported by the legislature that allowed breweries to start up with. It used to be almost impossible to start a brewery in the state of New Jersey. I've always had an entrepreneurial streak in me, coming from my parents. Both of them own their own business. My sister started one of the largest triathlon clubs in the country. So we all kind of, I don't know, it was just, and after working especially for KPMG and then Price Waterhouse, the whole corporate world, I just started getting really burnt out. I got burnt out by the travel. It was exhausting. balancing that with my family, and then looking at especially at the very largest management consulting firms and Big Four. You ever see the movie The Firm? It was almost like that. Like you have to be married to the corporation. You work your ass off for years to become a partner, and then once you become a partner, I worked with a lot of partners, and I noticed not many of them were happy.
You're a partner, then what, right?
And listen, making a lot of money, doing very well, but again, you're married to that company. You're spending 60, 70 hours on average, taking your job home with you, nights, weekends, all of that stuff, which again, I did, because of my travel and stuff like that. But I started looking beyond just, I reached a certain point and I was like, do I want to do this? And do I want to be one of these guys? Mm-hmm. Not saying it's a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing if that's what you're into. But again, that independent streak that I had, really started percolating because, I became a home brewer back in, 2006, 2007 is when I really got into home brewing. And I saw an opportunity in the state of New Jersey that, I could actually open up my own brewery. And I had a unique spin on it, and that I saw nobody else was doing. And really, it was like I had the conversation with myself and my wife, and obviously my family, to say, is this something that I want to do now? Or am I just going to be thinking about, 15, 20 years from now, eventually when I retire, wouldn't that be great? Well, I got to the point where I was like, I'm not happy in the corporate world, and I'm willing to take a risk, do something, and to not wait until I'm much older and may not have the energy and the focus that I had today. So that was really what was behind the decision. And it was a big risk, no doubt about it. And it did have its cost. Yeah.
Yeah. And you answered my question. You started actually home brewing. You said 2002, 2003. I was going to ask you, when did you become passionate about making beer? And it sounds like that about that time.
Yeah, well, it's funny, like back in college in the 90s, we experimented with home brewing, and to be honest with you, we had no idea what we were doing, and the beer was like terrible and hazy and clumpy, and but we were like just thrilled that we made beer, like you can do that, you can put beer on your stove, but it by no means did I understand the science behind it or the process or but when I moved to this area, I lived in Burlington County and Medford for a long time. Then I moved down to this area, and a newer development. We were one of the first houses in, and one of my neighbors was selling his brewing system. He's a passionate beer guy. I've always really, been into good beer. I remember like just getting a paycheck in college and spending it all on a case of beer. And at that point, there wasn't much available. Maybe Pete's Wicked Ale or Sam Adams in terms of like beer, aside from like Milwaukee's Best, But I couldn't believe it. So I started talking to my new neighbor, and he had like 6 beers on tap in his garage, which he made himself. And it was better than any beer that I could buy in the store. I couldn't. Very cool. How good homebrew beer could be. But then I realized that, he'd been studying this for years, and he's, read, dozen books and had all of these, had these expertise and became like a national beer judge. So he judged other homebrew and competitions and things like that. So he was selling his system. He was upgrading to a system. And so I bought his system because I had such an interest in it. And when I say a system, it was really rudimentary. I mean, it was a couple thermoses, a brew kettle, But the coolest thing is through that process, I learned directly from him. I like to say that he was my brewing Yoda. Seriously. And it's the best way. It's like a trade, it's the best way to learn something. It's not through a book necessarily, not through a course. It's by working side by side with somebody else who's an expert. And I had the blessing really to be able to do that for a couple of years with Jim, and he taught me the in and outs.
Best way to learn. Yeah, man.
Batches were not great. They were just drinkable. But by the time, I would call him. He was my lifeline because there's always something crazy happens when you first start brewing.
Yeah.
But
how do you gauge ABV? How do you gauge the liquor, the amount of alcohol content?
It's very simple. So you have something called a hydrometer, and the hydrometer measures the amount of sugar. That's what basically what you're doing when you're brewing is creating sugar water. Basically, when I say sugar, but it's barley malt and maybe some other adjuncts, but you're creating a very sugary water. You're adding yeast, and the yeast consumes that sugar. And what you're doing is you're taking the gravity of that soluble right after it's brewed. So it has a certain amount of sugar in it, which you put a hydrometer in. If you remember from your chemistry classes, you drop that hydrometer in, it tells you how much sugar is in that soluble. Well, then you add the yeast, it does its job. The yeast does two things. It consumes a lot of that sugar. It creates two things: CO2, which escapes from that vessel, and alcohol, which stays in. So that alcohol is essentially created through that process of fermentation. And then after that fermentation is done, you measure it again. And the difference between those two is your ABV.
Got it. No, thank you for sharing that. I was always curious.
Yeah.
On how accurate you can gauge that.
Very accurate. That's actually very accurate. Yeah, our brews. But the challenge is making sure it's consistent. All right. Yes. So one of the things I will tell your viewers, if anybody's a home brewer, it's when you become a home brewer, you're so excited. You're making beer, and you're used to, and you want to try all these different styles and things like that. And what Jim told me was, make the same beer 5 times. All right. And make that beer consistent across batches. So meaning that, you're controlling all those variables and making sure that, anybody can make a good beer one time. It takes a really good brewer to make that same beer repeatable. That's why a lot of people go to small breweries and they're like, oh, wow, this beer didn't taste anything like it did.
Like the last one.
Time I was here. That type of thing. Because maybe their process, maybe they're doing things a little differently. Maybe they're not. Maybe the beer is being fermented at the same temperature. There are a lot of variables that can go into it. But yeah, it's something that consistency in this industry is everything.
Yeah.
But like every industry. But
sure. Yeah, man. Definitely. Yeah. And then I got to tell you, every time I have my Cinnamon Toast Crunch, it is consistent. My favorite beer there. Can you talk a little bit about your very innovative branding, embracing the local Revolutionary War history of the region and where that idea came from? Yeah.
So it was funny. Once I decided, we moved to the area, as I said, in the mid 2000s. And and one of the things I loved about this area is it was a lot of old historic houses, and and I'm just a history buff. I love American history, Revolutionary War, Civil War. I love world history, World War I, World War II. I mean, I just finished a book, on just talking about the year 1941 and how basically, Germany lost the war in that year, even though it was just the war was just beginning, but they made critical decisions that cost them, long term. So I almost was a history major. It was political science or history. So I really love history. And it's when we moved down here shortly after, we were driving down Kings Highway, and I just saw a sign for the death of the Fox right off Kings Highway, which was a tavern that was almost 300 years old. That was, they used to go on fox hunts. This was the first organized hunting club, not just fox hunting, but organized hunting club in American history.
Wow.
Is right here. So it was the Gloucester Fox Hunting Club. It was founded in 1760, and they would meet at Death of the Fox Tavern after the hunts. There were 4 founding fathers who were part of this club that were signers of the Declaration of Independence. It's got incredible history. Basically, all of those Philadelphia, the founding fathers would come down to this area and engage in fox hunting, which of course is a very traditional British sport. So the Death of the Fox was that's why it was called the Death of the Fox. It's still standing today. It's a beautiful, let's say, a National Historic Landmark. It's a private residence now, but more than anything, it was like, I love that history, but I love the name.
Yes, it is very cool. And so is that history.
People, that we have some sensitive people, and they're like, "What do you have against foxes?" And I'm like, "I love foxes." If you look around, it's all like we're celebrating foxes, but we're also celebrating the history.
Yeah.
And in fox hunts right now, they don't kill the fox anymore. At least we've been on a few fox hunts. So I love that. I love that concept of that and bringing that into the brand. Well, I wanted it to be anchored in the history of this area, and something that was relevant, because I believe in starting the business, I wanted it to be nestled in the community and have an attachment to that community.
Got it.
And of course, the history geek in myself, it's like I wanted it to mean something versus just like Hazy Hops beer, Brewing Company or something like that. You know what I mean? Like something that was nestled the real history
that you tie to. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good stuff.
And then the interesting thing was working on the logos and everything like that. I engaged Westchester University art department, and through a mutual friend, I found an assistant professor at Westchester University who also worked on Yards branding. So the Yards Brawler, Yards, all of their Philly Pale Ale and all their traditional branding. He basically, did all of that. But he was also he wasn't necessarily, it was kind of like a side project for him. And I was introduced to him. And the cool thing is that he engaged his class as almost like a semester project to develop the branding of our company. And I will tell you that it was a process. Like, it was so important, that logo, the Running Fox logo. And there was just so many iterations of that. And my point to him always was simplify, make it something that was not too intricate. My rule was, I don't want to see a hop. I don't want to see the hop. Every brewery has a hop in its logo. And I want something that, at first, I didn't want to see a fox. I wanted something that was like out of the box. And there was a lot of iterations. I mean, it took 5 months in order to develop that. And I mean, a lot of back and forth. And I had to say no a lot. And I would say with business owners, you have to say no a lot.
Yes.
To get because it's your brand, and it's really important, especially in this industry. And then I came up with it. When I knew what to tell him. It was like, I want something that you can make a tattoo. I want something simple enough where if I had, I want to see like a really solid tattoo. What would I do? And then that's where we came up with our,
I have a shirt. I love it.
But branding is, and it's something, again, where, you apply that brand in almost everything you do. All of our cups, all of our, it's that logo. I wanted it to be instantly recognizable, like a Nike swoosh. So you just see the shape and you know that it's Death of the Fox. Versus, again, a picture of a hop or whatever it is, or very text-based. I didn't want it to be text-based. I want it to be an image.
Brand is everything, in my opinion. Everything.
Really.
Yeah. Well, you touched on a little bit before, and if you could just share a little bit more on the political and regulatory challenges that you experienced in this process of creating what you have today.
Yeah, that was there were huge challenges, and ironically, so in the last few years in the healthcare industry, there was a lot of government, I want to say intervention. I'm not going to get political.
Yeah.
I don't believe in any of that, especially as it relates to the company. But I will say that one of my frustrations was that healthcare was becoming so regulated, and so much. And it was like, yeah, at one point I wanted to get in government, but I decided to get into this industry, and it's feeling a lot like government now. So that's one of the things where ultimately why I decided to take this path.
Yeah.
And ironically, I would say that it's even more, there's even more regulations and that I have to deal with even than I did with healthcare. And I'm not complaining, because it just is what it is. But the alcohol industry, especially in the state of New Jersey, is highly regulated.
Yeah.
We had a great opportunity to open with our particular license, which is called a limited brewery license. Okay. It was established in 2012, 2013, and allows before this law, it was almost impossible to open up a brewery in the state of New Jersey. There was just there were just a handful. There were brew pubs, but actually, there was Flying Fish and maybe one or two up north, and that was it in terms of like a brewery that can have that can do a distribution, but also have a tasting room and that type of thing. And before that, really, the tasting room concept was like, if anybody visited a brewery 10 or 15 years ago, you might remember that it was all about the brewery itself, and then you might have a little tasting room where you do little samples and that type of thing.
Yes.
The industry has evolved, not just in the state of New Jersey, but nationally, and I would say even internationally, that breweries are now a completely different business model. They are a destination. They are a place that you go to for
an experience.
And it's very different than a restaurant. It's not. It's not a. It's like it's the concept of a third space. Okay, which means that it's not your home, it's not your office, but it's a place where you can go to where you can just kind of like your home away from home. In the 80s, it was a mall. In the 90s, it might have been a Starbucks or, but breweries have now taken on, and wineries and other distilleries, but really breweries in the they've taken on this really. In breweries, especially in the state of New Jersey, you don't have to worry about servers carrying around big plates of food. You can take your kids there and not have to worry about they can kind of walk around. You don't have to worry about being feeling weird about being at your table for more than a half hour after you eat. It's like that type of thing. It's a very different, and there's just the vibe thing. There's the craft. People are, many of our customers are just really into sampling different beers. They have a lot of questions. There's an education component. All of this stuff is really kind of goes into why New Jersey passed this law, because they wanted economic development within the state with small businesses created in New Jersey, product made in New Jersey, Wineries had been doing it for 10, 15 years, and they thought, okay, well, now, this is becoming a trend, a national trend with breweries opening up. Let's get New Jersey into this. The problem with that was restaurants saw breweries. Now, restaurants had the ability to say, okay, we're going to have breweries beers on tap, and that's, we are their customers. Suddenly, breweries are competitors, not necessarily just suppliers for their taps. So the restaurant lobby and industry in New Jersey is a very, very strong one. And this goes back to, Jersey City, old school.
North Jersey,
Think of the restaurants, think of your old school restaurants. They have a lot of clout and trend, and very long-term relationships. So when they saw this coming along, they were like, well, we don't, we have to pay. And the other thing is that the licensing system in New Jersey is pretty much broken. So if you're familiar with, there are some places in South Jersey, but especially North Jersey, where you have to pay $2+ million just to have the ability to serve alcohol. And that's
incredible.
Post-prohibition laws that that limited the number of licenses available in municipalities, and you could bid up those licenses. So, for example, let's say if you have 20,000 people in your municipality, 5,000 people a license, you have 4 licenses, and that license is up for open bid. Breweries, the way that it was structured, we don't have licenses like that. Like, you can buy and sell your license for an asset for millions of dollars in the state of New Jersey. Breweries, it's more like a permit. We pay an annual fee to the for their, for the ability to brew our product.
Make your beer, yeah.
So it's not necessarily an asset. We're buying all of our equipment. We're doing everything. Those are our assets, but the actual license itself is not an asset. I make that point because a lot of bars and restaurants want to say, well, it's unfair. Breweries can do, their competitors, and they don't have to pay for a regular license. We don't have to pay for a regular license, but we're very structured in terms of and limited in what we can do. That's why it's called a limited brewery license. We can't serve food in the state of New Jersey, period.
Right.
We can eat food, we can serve, they just over the last do like little snacks and like packages like nuts and that type of thing. Right now, there are a lot of stipulations limiting events, requiring a tour. So this is a whole thing.
Even televisions, right? Televisions and sporting events, using that.
Well, yeah, and all that stuff has kind of evolved over the last few years.
Yeah.
We can do some of that stuff now, but yes, when the licenses were first, or the brewery licenses were first established, it was very limited what breweries could do. And it wasn't necessarily, it became really, really challenging just to, like having this tour requirement when nobody really knew what that was. We couldn't have menus. So people can bring in food, but they can't look at a menu. There are a lot of things that breweries can't do, and the people who follow the industry in New Jersey know that. But we serve wine, we can't serve other spirits. We basically only serve what we make.
Yeah. So significant challenges across the board.
Yes, and so one of the things that, especially with traveling, I spent a lot of time in the West Coast when I was when I was in corporate, and I wanted to bring in a hybrid business, something that because if I left Pricewaterhouse and KPMG and these large companies, I knew that I couldn't half time it. I wanted to be completely focused on it, but at that time, breweries were only open 2 or 3 days a week. I didn't necessarily have the capital to do a large production brewery from the start. I didn't have millions of dollars in investors. What I wanted to do was to create a place and a vibe and an establishment where you can come in and experience what we had to offer. I had a very good idea what we wanted to do there. But I also, we're in a retail center. A lot of breweries are in warehouse districts or, kind of out of the way. We're right in a retail center with townhouses behind us and other businesses next to us. And so, and pay more in terms of our rent and lease.
I'm sure.
Other places who are warehouse. So I wanted to get the best utilization and utility and value out of that. And that meant being open 7 days a week. And it also meant potentially being open in the AM as well. And in order to do that, and I'm not going to get into the science of it, but coffee and beer. I found myself when I was when I was visiting different parts of the country and traveling, if I wasn't checking out the local brewery, I was in a coffee house in the morning, checking out places there. And I liked the vibe of those places. So I thought, why not bring those together? Nothing like that in the region, nothing like that in the state of New Jersey. Maybe, that model was starting to pop up in Colorado, Oregon. I think there was one in Austin, Texas, but just a few. But I really thought that would allow us to do a 7-day-a-week business, allow us to do an AM/PM business, and really bring those worlds together, which are actually have a lot of parallels to them. So I had to present this to the state in terms of a business plan, because nobody had done it before. And basically they were like, well, nobody's done this before. We're not sure if you can do this. And that process took about a year, and a lot of lawyers and a fair amount of, I guess, persuading to let the state know that this business is evolving every day. And we can't stay in one single, you can't stop businesses from innovating. Okay, businesses are going to innovate. Is the state going to just have this very strict interpretation of what a brewery is, or allow businesses to evolve and different things? And so they turned around and they said, okay, you convinced us. And that process, I mean, it delayed our opening by about 6 months. People thought I was crazy and stubborn why don't you just do a brewery? Why are you worried about the coffee? It's just,
that's your vision. Yeah.
And plus it makes us innovative. It makes us different. And I just saw the two worlds going together, and it was just, so yeah, it took some time. And I will say that that's a lesson. That's a lesson for any business owner out there, entrepreneur, that don't be afraid to stick your neck out. You have to know when to cut bait,
and have patience, right?
But you also need to know, okay, this is worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put the time and the resources into fighting for my vision. And, I'm glad we did that. Now, what happened the couple of years after that was a series of special rulings, again, kind of propelled and pushed by the Restaurant Association to further limit what breweries could do in the state of New Jersey, limiting the number of events we could do, limiting, like I mentioned, things like, the tour requirements and having even further, just a lot of things that kind of like, well, why? I don't understand why this doesn't make sense. And so we were pretty vocal.
Yeah.
We stuck our necks out and got very public. I was, in all three, ABCs, CBS, talking to all press. We formed a little group of breweries, what we call the Main Street or independent brewers. I organized this with a few breweries to get a petition out there against this special ruling, saying that it was unfair. And you can't change the rules in the middle of the game. State of New Jersey can't do that. We've established a certain business. Like, I knew I couldn't serve food. That's one thing, but I can't have somebody playing a guitar or provide a good experience for my customers. I don't know why that's the case. Like, weird rules about, you can have pizza delivered, but they have to pick it up at the outside, not the inside, or strange things like that. A lot of stuff back and forth. And and you would say, well, why didn't the Brewers Association or the formal associations, the guilds in New Jersey? We have two, and that's a whole nother story because they split. But and they were trying to, the guilds were, and the association was trying to work directly with the state. And tried to play nice. However, I kind of felt like, you know what, you're not defending the industry, and this is a step too far. And that was an incredible experience. So long story short, we put together a petition that got 35,000 signatures in a matter of 2 weeks. Wow. That went to the state and assemblymen, senators were all contacted. Their phones were lit up. People were engaged. They were saying, why are you picking on the breweries? What's this all about? And, sometimes the process works.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 weeks later, they suspended the ruling. Okay. And by the way, the next month, the ABC director who signed the ruling was no longer the ABC director. That may have been.
Yeah. Right.
But then, Phil Murphy was put in office right around that time. Mm-hmm. And then 6 months later, they reissue the ruling. It's softened a little bit, but the interesting thing is, Nick, that this new version of the ruling said very specifically that breweries could not serve coffee. And
interesting.
Wasn't in the first version.
Right.
You were very outspoken.
Right.
It was in the second version of the ruling.
So
again, we got our lawyers engaged. Yeah. And again, it's like one of those things where I think you need to understand that whenever you're faced with a challenge and an obstacle, it is potentially, you need to understand that sometimes the best thing is the worst thing. Sometimes the worst thing might turn out being the best thing in the long run. And even though we were just, oh my God, it was crazy. When they issued that, I went out of my mind. I was like, I couldn't believe that they would pick on us like that. They did do the fair thing. They grandfathered us in. And as of right now, for the last 2 years, we're the only brewery in the state of New Jersey who can do what we do. And so, we've certainly marketed around that. And then adding the roastery over the last year has certainly reinforced those, to even make the coffee even a bigger part of the business. But yeah, it was just a
love it.
It was an amazing process.
What a battle.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I remember you sharing some of the stories with me when I was in a few times, and just some of the challenges over the COVID, time frame too, and that leads me to the COVID impacts and how did you navigate from it? If you want to just share some of the things you needed to do to pivot.
Yeah. So here it was the end of March in 2020. We had just experienced our strongest quarter ever. We were experiencing 35% growth every year, and that quarter was 40% growth. Things were looking good.
Yeah.
And we were very much involved in it, and still are, but at that point, very close to executing on a second location in Pennsylvania. And suddenly everything changed.
Yeah.
And we had to close our tasting room. Suddenly, it was just like everybody. It was like, boom. Now, when that happens, you're left as a business owner, you're left with a lot of questions, sit around and blame and focus on the negative, where you can get to work and roll up your sleeves. And what we were able to do, and again, I will say that, I don't want to get too negative on the state, because, we did have our challenges with the state, and New Jersey is just kind of it's a complicated
challenge in itself. Yeah.
Business end, generally in every industry.
Yeah.
But I will say the state of New Jersey came through for the industry last year. They allowed breweries to sell beer online. That wasn't allowed before. They allowed us to do residential delivery, carry out from parking lots. And then, a couple months later, allowed us to open and have temporary permits for outdoor premise. All of that allowed us to we had to make very quick decisions, upgrade everything on our websites and technology. Technology was a big part of it. Really ramp up our canning capability, make very quick decisions on establishing an outdoor area, getting all those permits done. And, you know, we were operating almost like a beer festival 4 days every week last year, you know, with setup and breakdown and doing it. You have to do what you have to do.
Yeah.
You know, I suddenly was back in the weeds of the business, doing
I can imagine
that. You know, I have a staff of 12 here, and, you know, I didn't have to lay anybody off. So we got through it, and we were able to pivot our business pretty quickly, and
figured out
every month there was a new challenge. You know, and it's just, but in all of that was huge opportunity, and it allowed us, and I will give one example, and probably the biggest example of last year, is, you know, we didn't have anybody in the tasting room, so we could focus on a construction project that wasn't limited on just being closed on Monday and Tuesday afternoon and nights. Because really, as I said, you know, we're one of the only breweries open 7 days a week, and we're open, you know, all day and all night, you know, 5 days out of the week. So we have a very small window where we could actually do like a construction project without disrupting customers and, you know, and that type of thing. But because our tasting room was closed, it allowed us to really quickly and efficiently build the roastery and get that done, and it allowed me to focus on what we need to do to get the roastery up and going. And the roastery was up in about 4 months from the point that things were shut down. And then about 6 months, 6 months after the shutdown in March, we actually started selling and producing our own roasted beans, coffee, everything. We transitioned from outsourcing our coffee to a great small company out of Mullica Hill, Crescent Moon, who were terrific for us for the first 2-3 years. But, you know, I wanted to have control of my own supply chain. I wanted to have control, you know, be able to take advantage of wholesale margins and things like that we could do in producing and roasting our own product, just like we do on the beer side. So that was the original vision, but we were able to get that done. And one of the key numbers that I look at every month is the ratio of beer that we sell to coffee. And that has almost doubled in the last 4 months.
Wow.
So it's without the beer sales going down either.
Right.
So, you know, the coffee sales, because selling our own whole bean coffee out of bags, you know, the cold brew out of cans, all of this stuff that allows us to enhance the coffee side of the business, and therefore the diversity of our product offerings on both sides of coffee and beer.
Excellent. Now, good for you. And I love the growth. Good stuff. And speaking of which, construction, you have a second location, right? Are you looking to open a second location?
We don't have it yet, but currently that's it's in the works. We're looking in Pennsylvania, and I was just there last week, and that is one of the. I told you we were grandfathered in the state of New Jersey for a beer business.
Yeah.
One of the trade-offs that we have with the state is that we won't create a second location that does both. And that's
in the state or outside the state?
In the state.
In the state.
So, which means that, you know, a couple years ago, we were looking at Washington Township. Washington Township doesn't have a brewery. It was a great location. But we had to punt on that because the state would not allow us to do that.
Stipulation. Got it.
The stipulation to say you're grandfathered in your location in Clarksboro, but which again is why would the state want to limit business growth like that? That's a whole nother discussion. But unfortunately, you know, what we're resorted to now, our location, you know, our base location is always going to be right here in East Greenwich, and but in order to really to grow with our locations, which was always on our business plan, I didn't necessarily want to be a production level, huge volume business. We wanted to have multiple locations. In order to do that right now, we'd have to go outside of the state.
Got it.
That's what we're working on. I don't know how it might be a year or two.
Yes, got
right.
it.
It's a matter of kind of getting through what this, the reopening and all of the challenges.
The expansion. Yeah.
It's all good. Yeah.
Got it. And outside of business and work, which you're obviously very passionate about, what do you like to do that you're passionate about outside of work?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, for any small business owner who has a family with children doing everything, I mean, you have to, they are my priority. And it is a challenge as a small business owner to be able to, not spend so much time in the office. And I've really been, I think when we first opened the business, I'll be honest, I did what I had to do to open up the business, and I was here 80 to 100 hours a week.
Yeah.
And one of the things I had to do to correct, to make this a long-term thing, is to make sure that I set those boundaries and I had time for myself and time for my family.
Yeah.
So now I make sure that I'm home every night for dinner, most nights, that I take the weekends off. You won't see me hanging out here much on a Friday or Saturday night. Much like a good doctor, I don't take my own medicine too much. People always ask me, they're like, I expect you to have a beer in your hand. I'm like, it's pretty rare that you're going to see me with the beer in my hand, except at a Fox only. And I make sure that but it's just, I found that's
something you need to do. Yeah.
It's just like, this is work. It's great work. It's fun. There's so many great aspects of it, but you have to be able to draw that line. In terms of other things, I've done really been a passionate runner for a very long time. So, I've done some marathons, did some triathlons, that type of thing. I think with starting the business, I haven't done a marathon since I started the business. But just, running it, because it's so physical. I mean, I will say that, I had a desk job for 15, 20 years. Now I am,
moving and grooving, baby. Yeah.
Large bags of 55 pound. So like, in a way, work itself is a workout. So, but you still have to, like, I love, competitive endurance sports and that type of thing. I'm a huge music guy. I've been playing guitar now for almost 30 years. So in a way, that's a way that I'm able to just kind of get out of my own head. I also believe in mindfulness and meditation, and that's also an opportunity. Just kind of, so challenging. Again, as a small business owner, you always have 10 plates that you're spinning, and so many things that, again, preparing yourself for the long term, you need to be able to do those things to offset, or you're just going to burn yourself out. That's the last thing you want to do.
I can so relate.
Thing I will say is hiring good people, and not being afraid to delegate. You have, in order to grow, you have to delegate, and it's hard sometimes as a business owner to let go of that control that you have. But by doing that, you do get the blessing of having more time for yourself. And that's, you don't want to be your own obstacle. As a business owner, you need to be able to see yourself as a resource. So like, you're kind of, you have your CEO hat and you have your worker hat, and you need to manage yourself with your CEO hat to say, okay, I want that guy doing this, but I don't want that guy doing that. That's a challenge. It's a challenge to do that, to basically manage yourself. especially in this industry with restaurants and small restaurants and things like that. I think a lot of people are challenged with that, and you don't want to be your own obstacle to growth. So
got it. Great share.
That other stuff is really important.
Yep. Love it, man. And I'm gonna end. And again, I really appreciate you being here, man. It was I was really excited for this to learn the ins and outs and the details of what you do and how you got there. I love it. Great story. And so I'm going to end with, if someone wants to get into something they're passionate about, whether it's a brewery, whether it's construction, get out of the corporate world. What would your advice be to someone that's thinking about doing something that's not the traditional path, and they want to break out and follow their heart, follow their passion?
Well, I will say this is I very much took the traditional college, and then graduate school route, and it's ironic. It's that I'm kind of reversed now. Like I'm,
and that's why I love the story.
Trades and
yes,
that type of thing versus like blue collar versus white collar.
Yep.
I'm a reformed white collar guy, but
love it.
But especially with hands-on stuff, I think that people, you need to. Okay, I'll say this. People go, how awesome it is. You started a brewery, that must be a dream to do your, to do your dream job and that type of thing. And I tell them it's not a dream, it's a plan. All right. It's a plan. It's not a dream, meaning that, you can sit there and think about, okay, this is great. This is what I'm going to do. But if you actually don't sit down and make that plan, if you don't put together a business plan, you don't put together financials, you need to do your homework, to understand how you're going to do these things that you think you're going to do. And, you're not going to get magical beans like Jack and the Beanstalk and be able to plant them and have this great business that's just going to grow without putting together and understanding that most of the stuff you're going to experience,
problem solving,
been done before. Best practices.
Yeah.
People have conversations. Introduce yourself to other people that are in the business that you're looking to get into. Do your homework and volunteer your time. I mean, I just said, I went to a local breweries and I said, hey, you need help on a Saturdays, that type of thing, just for a few hours, just to see how they do things at a professional level, versus a hobby level.
Yep.
So making your hobby and making it your profession, that takes, it's two different levels, right? Like you can't take just what you're doing as your hobby, especially in certain trades. I mean, maybe in some things, but I will say in this side of the business and manufacturing, construction, all these things that require, that's the reason why, if you look back on, the last, what we're doing is not new. You talk about history, going back to the 1700s, things were done through apprenticeship. If you wanted to be, if you wanted to be a blacksmith, you worked as an apprentice for a blacksmith for a number of years. It's the same thing. You go out and be an apprentice in your spare time. Research instead of watching Netflix. Spend some time actually looking into. It's what you do with your downtime that allows you to be successful in your uptime. Not saying that but especially as I had to go all in terms of together our business plan while I was still working in corporate. And
you were committed. Yep.
That required a lot of sacrifice, like a lot of times where I couldn't go out on Friday, Saturday night. I couldn't go out to dinner because I was looking at or do the things but because, you're building something and that takes time. It's just not going to happen overnight. But I will emphasize that really learn what you're looking to get into, understand the difference between being a hobby versus being a business, and volunteer.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. And if people can get a hold of you, you want to share your website, your social media, how people can contact you?
deathofthefoxbrewing.com. So you can Google Death of the Fox, not Death of a Fox. A lot of people call us Death of a Fox, which, it's one or the other. You could probably Google it, and it'll do the same thing, but we are Death of the Fox. And then with that, you'll see all of our, our social media, our Instagram, Facebook, all of that. All of our beer menus are right on site. Right on the website. All of our merch, pretty much our website is a one-stop shop for everything you need. And it's we've really made our business virtual over the last year. So
many, right?
Something on the website, shoot me, and my email address is right on the bottom of the website. We also have our mailing list. So if you want to know what's happening, music, live music, and trivia and all that fun stuff, beer releases are a big thing. New beer releases, all that stuff. Follow us on Facebook, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list, and you'll see all the latest and greatest we have going on. So.
Chuck, thanks again, man. I really appreciate you for taking the time, and I can't wait for this episode to go live.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, man. I'll see you soon. Thanks.